Today we're gonna watch how the US stole Mexico. Did it really happen? What's the opinion of this Mexican? Let's watch. Alright, bro. I'm not gonna lie, I'm really excited for this one. I haven't watched it, but it has 2 million views. It seems like it's a well-made video.
Back when the British Empire was colonizing all of this land, they drew a line. The line went right along this little mountain range, and it was meant as a boundary.
The
Back in London, they were
Appalachians.
saying that no English settler was allowed to settle west of
How
this
do you
line.
pronounce it?
The British Empire did this because they were worried that if settlers started to expand into the west, they would bring the British Empire into a war with native populations. They also didn't want to unnecessarily piss off France, who also had land in the west. So they told their settlers to
They did
settle,
it anyways.
but not past this line. And then the settlers completely ignored it.
These settlers would eventually declare independence from Britain and start their own country. And from there, the floodgates were open for westward expansion.
A frontier people had remade a continent. Virtually all productive land had been put to the plow. A free and independent way of life prevailed.
This westward blitz was made possible through the mass slaughter of people who were living on this land, which this little time-lapse ignores. How that all went down will be the subject of another video. But right now, I want to talk about what happened.
Yeah, it's sad. It's really sad. I read about things like the the trial of tears, and it's really sad. But you also had the U.S. wasn't the only country to do it. Neither was it the first. Europeans did it, and countries in Latin America did it as well. So, they're not the only one. They're not the exception. That's just how it went at the time. Not, it wasn't right, obviously. And, let's just watch.
When the U.S. got here.
By the way, if you guys speak Spanish, you can click on the links in the description. I have a YouTube channel on Spanish, so you can check that out and subscribe if you want to help me out. And also, I have multiple links that you can check out if you want to help the channel out.
It's the mid-1800s, and the U.S. has 27 states and a bunch of territories in the West. But the country doesn't
27.
stretch from sea to shining sea quite yet. At this point, they start to bump into the recently independent country of Mexico.
Whew. Shit's
The
gonna go
northern part of
down.
Mexico was called Texas, or Texas, and it was populated mainly with native groups who had nothing to do with the U.S. or Mexico. They had just been living there for centuries.
So Mexico's looking at this fairly new, sparsely populated part of their country and thinking, what do we do with all this land? They wanted to incentivize people to go and settle in this land, so it would potentially be more economically productive for the country of Mexico. So they made a plan. They started to rent huge swaths of land to American settlers so that they would come in and settle the land. And in return, these American settlers would recruit more settlers to come in and settle the land.
Yeah.
Again, all with the hope that it would benefit Mexico's economy eventually.
It did exactly the opposite. American settlers fled into Texas onto this newly rented land, just as the Mexican government hoped for. But with them, they brought slaves, which was totally illegal in Mexico at the time. They also brought with them an attitude of independence and frontier fever, this American obsession with moving west to settle new land.
The westward movement was like a great tidal wave. The odd corners were rapidly engulfed.
Mexico soon realized that this plan completely backfired, and that the Americans that had rented land from them were now not interested in having Mexico as their government. So Mexico sends in the military to remind the settlers that they're still in Mexico, and that they're technically renting this land from Mexico.
Well, this eventually escalated, and they started to fight all-out battles, and the American settlers lost.
The big battle here was called the Battle of the Alamo. This guy,
Remember
David
the
Crockett,
Alamo.
who was like the symbol of westward expansion, died in this battle. And this loss spurred even more settlers to come to Texas and join the next fight against Mexico, which the American settlers won. And with that, they declared a new nation, independent of Mexico.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that at the time, depending on the year, Mexico was fighting a sort of civil war between liberals and conservatives. So Mexico City was a lot more concerned about that. And then you have these rebels in Texas. But you're fighting a civil war. Like, the army is busy. So, and then you have to send the army miles up north to fight against American settlers that, lost and lost at the Alamo, and they just are going insane. It didn't go good. It didn't go well. Yeah.
The Republic of Texas. Now the map looks like this: a newly declared country of American settlers in between Mexico and the United States.
What do you think was going to happen?
But not everyone actually agreed that the map looked like this.
Yep.
While Mexico conceded that they lost the
The
war,
Nueces
they
River.
disputed this map, saying that the border of the new Republic of Texas was actually here, and that all of this was still Mexico. So now you have a big land dispute between Mexico and the Republic of Texas. Well, soon it's 1845, and Texas becomes the 28th state of the United States. And yet
James
this
Polk.
land is still disputed. But now it's a land dispute between the United States of America and Mexico. Let's keep in mind that despite all of this map drawing, there are still loads of native peoples who have lived on this land for years and are now being suffocated.
And by the way, talking about the natives people, Mexico had, just like the American Indian Wars, Mexico also had Mexican Indian Wars, and including with tribes that now are part of like Arizona and New Mexico. Is it the Navajo, if I'm not mistaken? There were conflict with them. And many, many more that I'm forgetting because I'm too ignorant about it, but that was also happening. Like I said, the U.S. wasn't the only one.
By all these nations trying to take their land.
Again, that's another episode, and it's an important episode, and I want to do
Yeah,
it justice.
for sure.
But for now, what happens next in the Mexico story gets kind of nuts.
Mexico story, it's kind of nuts.
And the reason it gets kind of nuts is mainly because of this guy, President James K. Polk.
James Polk wins the presidency and comes into office with a list.
I like James Polk and his story. You know, he had like 4 things he wanted to do. He said, I'm not going to run another term. And he accomplishes those things, which I think it gets like getting Texas and California, getting Oregon, and then like doing other 2 things that, again, I'm too ignorant to mention. But, you know, that's a kind of wholesome story. And I know as a Mexican, it's kind of weird to say I like James Polk. But I like his story at least, you know. He came in, he had 4 things he wanted to do, he did them, then run again. What maybe politicians should do nowadays?
Of 4 big things he wants to do. It's his big wish
Hey!
list. At the top of this wish list is Polk's desire to capture this very specific part of Mexico, which is called California.
Well, he wanted to
Remember
buy
that
it,
at
if
the
I'm not
time,
mistaken.
The U.S. didn't actually stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The U.S. had colonized portions of Oregon territory, but it was kind of confusing because they were kind of competing with the French and the British, and they didn't actually own it yet. But you'll notice that Oregon was also on Polk's shortlist. But first, California. He first tried to buy California from Mexico for $25 million. Mexico flat out said no. So Polk decides to pull an incredibly dirty move.
He sends the army.
Remember this big old swath of disputed territory that the U.S. inherited when they admitted Texas into the Union? James Polk was pissed off that Mexico didn't take his offer to buy California. So he sends a small group of troops into this disputed territory and has them march right up to here, right across from the river that separates what everyone agrees is Mexico.
But according to Mexico, they've already been in Mexico as soon as they crossed into this disputed territory, which Mexico believes is theirs.
So the Mexican army is sent to respond to what looks like an oncoming attack from the United States. This is exactly what Polk wanted. A group of 1,600 Mexican soldiers attack this small group of 80 Americans, killing 11 of them and capturing the rest. They easily won since they were outnumbered by like a magnitude of like 20. But this is exactly what Polk needed to get his wish list going. After this battle, Polk goes to Congress and reports that the Mexicans have, quote, invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil. Even though this wasn't necessarily American soil, it was disputed territory that most people thought was rightfully Mexico. But it didn't matter. The death of Americans was enough to rally Congress around declaring war with Mexico. The U.S. easily won this war, and they did it pretty quickly. Remember that the taking over of Texas was originally a bunch of settlers who band together, made a militia, fought Mexico on their own, and declared the Republic of Texas. Not super great, but at least it wasn't like a government leader sending his soldiers in that he knows are going to lose to provoke another country to kill those soldiers so that he can use democratic processes and institutions to make war, all so that he can take over
let's be honest, that's kind of fucked up.
Country.
I mean, Polk really wanted California. Jeez.
There were critics of this at the time, one of whom was this guy, who said that letting Polk force the country into war with Mexico was,
did not
quote,
knew that.
allowing him to make war at pleasure. And Abe hit the nail on the head. This whole war was started and fought at the pleasure of this president, James K. Polk. So anyway, the U.S. easily wins the war. They pay Mexico $15 million, and Mexico gave up all of this. As a part of this loss, Mexico also conceded all of this disputed territory, making it officially a part of the U.S. state of Texas. The U.S. had grown significantly in just a couple of years, and Polk got his California. The U.S. could have taken more land. Some American lawmakers at the time wanted to take all of Mexico, and militarily, they likely could have done this. But they only took this part of Mexico because it was the most sparsely populated, mainly by Native Americans. One senator at the time, who happened to be pro-slavery, argued on the Senate floor against taking
Why
all
does
of
he
Mexico,
look like that?
saying, quote, "We have never dreamt of incorporating into the Union any but the Caucasian race, the free white race. Are we to associate with ourselves as equal companions and fellow citizens the Indians and mixed races of Mexico?"
In other words, let me put it plainly, the policy was, let's search for land where we can exterminate the natives and settle white people, instead of, let's take land where there's already big populations that are non-white people that we would have to bring into our country. This is a policy that informed American expansion and imperialism for a very long time, and it's what guided a lot of what land we took over and what land we didn't take over.
Okay, so through this unprovoked, racially tinged war, Polk checked off California from his list. And just the next month, Oregon was organized into a territory after working out a deal with the British. Polk had exterminated anyone in his way, and now he had a coast-to-coast country. A few years later, they bought this little piece of land from Mexico.
Gadsden Purchase.
And this completed the southern border that we know today. One that was forged first from a rebellion of American settlers, then a war at the pleasure of James K. Polk, and then finally that little purchase there at the end. The native people and Mexicans that lived here when the U.S. took it over,
and let's be clear on something, that is not a small number.
They were predictably oppressed as white settlers fled into this region, often looking for gold. Native people were driven from their land, and the rights of Mexican property owners were erased in the name of a state constitution that only let white people vote.
This land, after a little more than a century and a half,
yeah, that's pretty messed up.
A great nation, the United States of America.
So the U.S. stole Mexico in the 1800s, partly because they opened their borders to Americans to let them in to work their land.
What an irony, isn't it?
Which is just a very strange full circle irony, especially because today you go to the U.S.-Mexico border and we do everything to make it clear that this side of that wall is the U.S., when just a few years ago it was all Mexico. I wish, like the Hawaii video, I had some high note to end on here, but I don't, so see ya.
That's it?
These stories about how the U.S. expanded teach me so much about how the U.S. got its shape. All
right, Skillshare. You can, talking about Skillshare, you can go click my links on the description to, get my class on Skillshare. But wow, that was a really good video. It went so quick. I don't think the U.S. stole Mexico per se, but it kind of did a little bit. And yeah, it's sad. A lot of Mexicans are nostalgic about the loss of that territory. And don't forget, a lot of those. Let's see if we can pull up the map here a little bit. A lot of the towns here in
now
in like the southern U.S. For example, look at Texas. You got Brownsville, McAllen, even El Paso. These are places that are 80 to 90% Hispanic or more. In Arizona, even in California, Imperial County, you have Yuma in Arizona. These places are have been over 90% Hispanic for a long time. And I think maybe the U.S. could have settled for the territory with the border at the Nueces River. you know, because that's where the American settlers were anyways. This place was colonized by Mexicans. Not a lot, but there were Mexicans over here. But, you know, shit happens. I'm not angry about it. You know, it is what it is. Let's just strive for a good relationship as two countries that are friends overall. I like to think that. I strive for that. And yeah, y'all have a good one. I also don't have anything to end on a high note, so that's just gonna have to do.